welcome back to another episode of the Whole Potato Podcast. Today I have Ben French with me. He is the CEO and president of Shepherd's Way, which is an incredible organization located in Wichita, Kansas. And so welcome, Ben, to the podcast.
So excited to be with you, Krystian, and love the work that you're doing, and just honored to be with you this morning.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, I want to hear all about, I know we have talked before about how Shepherd's Way came to be and kind of your heart behind it, but I just want everyone to know. So will you tell us what is Shepherd's Way and how did it all start?
Yeah, so, I'll tell you a little of my personal story as I kind of ramp up into that. And I'm not that smart, Krystian, and so oftentimes my plans and God's plans are different. And luckily, God's way is divine and sovereign. And so my goal and my dreams for my life as I was entering young adulthood really were just to play professional baseball. And I wanted to use that as a platform to share the gospel. That was my big dream for my life. And it was just kind of one of those things that I had it all figured out and God signed here and he didn't. And all the baseball doors closed. And I had all of my eggs in that basket. All of my energy, effort, hopes, desires were in that basket. And so I actually had a little bit of an identity crisis when baseball came to an end. And I really found myself in this, it was a pretty dark and directionless season of life where I was like, what's my purpose? And reading books and, listening to podcasts, all of the things to try and figure out what's my purpose? Because I felt low. And about that time, I started working, doing ABA therapy in a clinic here in Wichita. And I also met a young man that would for sure influence and change the trajectory of my life. And his name was Dallas. And so met Dallas through Young Life. We went to a camp in Arizona and got to meet Dallas and several of his friends and really was pretty deeply exposed to the beauty and the pure, authentic, just genuine beauty possessed in our friends with special needs during that week at that camp in Arizona. And so came back and just felt like there was more to it than just a week-long camp as I came back. And so I actually would spend 2-3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week, hanging out with Dallas, some of his friends. He had a pretty rough upbringing and home life. And so just even getting to play the role of a friend in his life and getting out of the home, which sometimes meant, getting to have a meal that day, was a piece of purpose that I was starting to experience. And so that was a really big deal in my life. And then fast forward a year, Dallas was in a homeless shelter. Unfortunately, all of the resources that should have been going to him were going to other things and not to shelter or food. So anyways, he found himself yet again in another homeless shelter. And, you'd never know this about Dallas just from meeting him because he's the most joyful human you maybe have ever met. It's just, I just love the guy. But historically, Dallas was born at 2 pounds, 7 ounces, diagnosis of autism and severe intellectual disabilities. He was abandoned by his father at an early age, grew up in and out of homeless shelters, drug abuse in the home, physical, mental, emotional abuse himself. And so it's really remarkable when you see who Dallas is despite all that he's been through. Really is. It doesn't compute logic, and so there's something just beautiful about that resilience. And so when he was in a homeless shelter, I started to, really tap into that thought process of like, man, how do we continue to build on this beauty that is my friend Dallas, And so he was in his 9th week at the shelter and they had an 8-week stay limit. And so the knee-jerk reaction was just, how do we get him out of this cycle of in and out of homeless shelters? And so applied for crisis funding to get him jumped to the top of, I think, what was a 3,400 person waiting list at the time in the state of Kansas to get into a group home. And the state came back and they said, hey, homelessness without an imminent health risk is not a crisis. And so they denied Dallas's application for crisis funding, which at the time I was dumbfounded by, but today I'm really thankful for it because what it did was it forced us to take a more private approach to meeting his needs. And so me and Dallas moved into a 2-bedroom apartment downtown, and we just started figuring out life together. And it was this really just cool co-mentorship situation where, he was impacting my life in a really positive way. Like to think I was impacting his life in a positive way. And we got to work on skills that would help change the trajectory of our life, right? Just simple skills that we maybe execute with it without really thinking about the process of day to day, like doing my laundry every week and taking a shower and brushing my teeth and all those ancillary life skills that help us to be able to flourish when we're integrated into the community. And Dallas just needed a little extra help learning some of those skills. And we just by happenstance and the Lord's doing ended up in this really impactful program model, which was peer-to-peer mentorship. Like, again, I'm not very smart, so I wouldn't have come up with all of that, but it turned out to be really impactful and really effective. And so, about a year and a half into seeing Dallas's success in that model and really seeing that, Dallas was never going to end up in another homeless shelter because of the growth that he had experienced and because he now had really positive connections, in his life where there was mutually beneficial no longer just charitable friendships, right? But really, it was a mutually beneficial friendship. And so that growth was something that we couldn't just set on, right? There was something special to that. So then we started looking at, okay, how do we replicate this? For a couple of reasons. One, we've got to build more and more community for Dallas among his peers. And then two, in doing that, we've got to also create opportunities for others to follow in Dallas's footsteps because there were 3,400 other people on that waiting list. Today it's 5,300, although I think they just passed something that created the funding to reduce that by 500. So it's like 4,800 now. But, I think as we look at the overall system, they're experiencing more and more pressure from this growing wait list. And so really our efforts to replicate that program model into today, what is a really neat team running a pretty robust program that's really impacting lives. Our efforts are hopefully going to take some of those individuals off of that sometimes lifelong wait list and reduce some of the pressure on some of those organizations in the system that are doing really impactful work for those with an even greater need. So that's kind of how we got started. But I would say, the heartbeat today, what really keeps me going is, quite honestly, Christians, I think about just, what Jesus did for us, and the brutality of what he went through and the length that he went through in a way that it's unfathomable for me to even try and comprehend, when you think about a guy who was documented bleeding out of his pores because he was so stressed out because he knew the full weight of what was coming, right? But then, as John says, when they came to arrest him, just his words shook the ground and those that were coming to arrest him fell. So he knows the full weight of what's to come. He has the ability to escape that situation. I mean, I've been stressed before, but never to the point where I'm bleeding out of my pores. That's another level of stress, right? So we put those two things together and he still willingly goes through all of that so that we could have intimacy with God for the rest of forever in grace and mercy that allows that. My goodness, there's no length that we could ever go to that would be too much to serve or impact someone else, But then the other thing that I think Jesus left us with was this example of going and pursuing those in the margin,
Yeah.
And if we accomplish, who cares what we accomplish from a worldly standpoint, right? But if we can accomplish going and seeing and loving and believing in and empowering one of those beautiful humans in the margin, no matter what they're going through, whether it's somebody with special needs or other challenges, right? That's worthy in my book. And there's such an opportunity for that because, as we mentioned today, there are 5,300 adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities just in the state of Kansas who are in that margin, or we can call it 4,800 today, but that's just the state of Kansas. hundreds of thousands across the country, that simply because of a diagnosis that they received. Well, not just the diagnosis, the challenges that they're experiencing, or we're turning a blind eye and allowing them to exist in the margin of society. They're some of the most beautiful people in the world that our community gets so much better when they're integrated into our community. So and that's what gets me really, really excited about the work. And so, those 5,300 or hundreds of thousands across the country, kind of how I like to think about it, or not like to think about it, however you look at it, is that these are individuals who have graduated from high school or post-secondary into the post-secondary world. And their life trajectory oftentimes looks like dependence from their family or a caregiver, right? Until they inevitably outlive that family or caregiver and end up in a system that cost us, quite frankly, 2.3 million tax dollars to meet their basic needs. And that system is becoming just more and more overwhelmed. And so it's becoming harder and harder for those incredible organizations within the system doing amazing work to retain people and provide services that are helping individuals grow. And it's kind of starting to foster this, maybe a little bit of a survival type mindset on average. Yeah. What we've said as an organization is, hey, let's step into the gap before we even get on that wait list for 10 plus years. Early on, like, let's be a part of the bridge during that transition into adulthood that helps our friends transition out of the margin of society and into a flourishing, value contributing member of our community, because I think that would be God's design. That bridge for us looks like a 4-phase program that begins with really intensive career development and exploration, and building all of the ancillary life skills that are going to help sustain that employment, entry-level employment, but then also the career path that we may to explore. And then once I've got income and I've got a career path and I've got the skills to help sustain that job and the support system of Shepherd's Way to help support the long-term career path, then I'm ready to move out of that state of dependence into a community of peers with it's life on life. It's daily fellowship. It's constant accountability and growth. And it's done in a fun, peer integrated manner. So we go from career development to a house. We hire college students and young professionals to live in our homes. And they're some of the most incredible people in the world. Somebody who says, hey, in this season of life that is college, when the world says it's all about consumption, it's all about me, it's all about, they're like, no, I'm going to be a little counter the world, and I'm going to spend my college experience serving one of my peers and impacting their family. That's pretty cool. So that 3-phase housing program looks like living first with 2 peer mentors, and then over the course of 6 to 24 months, as I become more independent and I'm ready to transition to live with just one peer mentor and one of my peers who's also going through the program, and then eventually a 3 or 4 bedroom setting with no peer mentors, where we continue to sustain the support that's needed to maintain the current level of independence and community engagement and purpose within life. And it's, we use the term independence a lot, but one of my new favorite terms is interdependence. We're all like, not just like dependence on the Lord, like we talked about earlier, but like this dependence that we have on our community, right? And so it's not about me living alone and having all the skills under the sun mastered, but really like leaning into this beautiful community living environment where everybody is just growing and feeding each other, fueling each other, and empowering each other. So that's kind of the beauty of how I like to look at the work that we do, and a little bit about the structure. Our mission is launching adults with disabilities into independent, community engaged, and purpose-driven lives. That what I kind of just described as the structure of how we go about delivering on that. But really it's this vision of how do we transform the landscape of post-secondary opportunity, housing, employment, independent living, dignity, purpose for adults with disabilities and communities across the country. Like, that is exciting, and so everything that we're building with the intention of we want to give this away to anybody that would like to really go run with it in their community and get to start to see people coming out of the margin and celebrate it in the community and contributing real, tangible, viable value into the community. Also intangible value and beauty into the community. So we've got big dreams and big visions, but we're a small, intimate team doing really individualized work.
That's awesome. My goodness. Yeah. I'm glad you shared that because I think I love the interdependence. Something I've seen in the disability community is I would see some of our clients who, their goal was independence. And so they worked really hard and they got that apartment by themselves. And a few months later, they were so sad,
Mm.
because the focus is independence. And I think that's great. And there's so many people that really can live independently. But when we forget all the other pieces and all of a sudden I'm by myself. I'm just in this apartment alone all the time and I don't know what to do with my free time. And so I snack and I watch TV. We've seen this again and again. And so I think it's really cool that you put all the pieces together and
Mm.
understand that, yeah, you need community. Independence is great, but oh my goodness, I don't know what I would do without my Tuesday night Bible study. Like I
Yeah.
need community and I need my husband and
Mm.
so I love that you guys see that. You're talking
Mm.
about standing in the gap and the example of Jesus. Jesus tells us that we will be known by our love and
Mm.
we'll be known by the way we care for other people. And um, I had a conversation a few episodes back with someone and we were talking about how it's not enough to say like bless your heart. Like, sure, people with disabilities can come to my church or like they don't bother me. It's like, no, that's not the goal. The goal is like that community that allow people with disabilities to be in your life and to be a friend, to edify the church, to be your coworker. And
Mm.
it's not charity friendship. I have friends with disabilities that will call me out and remind me of truth. And I think it's something that people don't always see or maybe I think our society just has a ways to go really understanding the value of people with disabilities and they're not a charity case to throw a few things at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really I absolutely just love what you're saying. It's almost like they're like tethered or anchored to a lot of the principles that Jesus taught us in a much stronger fashion than a lot of what we see in the world. And so like, and that can be a blessing and a curse at times, where it's like, we can be extra vulnerable because we have such an unconditional nature to our friendships, right? But like that's how Jesus was, right? Like there's nothing that we received that we deserved, like if there are wrongs, if there are like they're so quick to forgive and offer grace, and that's just like beautiful. And then, as I described in Dallas's story, Dallas is one example, but there's this joy that doesn't always necessarily match the circumstance or the history, right? And so like there's just so many principles that Jesus taught us that they embody so well. And it's I've always tried to think about like what is that, God? Like, is it that, and maybe we'll never know on this side of heaven, but there is something beautiful about it, regardless of the rationale or the why, but like I've often thought, man, like, is the cognitive, like, who really has the disability? Like, is the cognitive impairment create freedom from the anxieties of the world that I
Mhm.
have, that I causes me to bring anxiousness to the table, to the room, to the situation, when they're bringing joy to the room, to the table, to the situation?
Yeah.
It's just so interesting to think about. But regardless of the rationale or the explanation or why, like, you can't not recognize the beauty within these friends, which is such an important part of, like you said, it's not just charitable, recognizing the value. And I do think we have a long ways to go, which is why we have to keep having these conversations, is that as these individuals are empowered to be fully integrated and contributing value, adding members of our community, that the community starts to understand what we've, and before I met Dallas, like I have to admit, I don't know that I really knew that. I certainly didn't fully appreciate that. It's those experiences. And so the more of these friends we can empower, the more people experience that, the more we shift a paradigm in the community. We start to transform the way that community sees disability.
Yeah.
Like, that would be beautiful.
Yeah. I that is something that I've been praying over a lot. Is just I can see it. Like I see that revival of just families in the disability community, that revival in our world of just understanding their worth and understanding God on a new level uh, because of what people with disabilities show. That pureness. We had our
Mhm.
conference this weekend, and we threw in an impromptu worship night because we were noticing that we would do our few worship songs and they would be so bummed when worship was done
Yeah.
and it was time to move on to breakout groups or whatever. And so we threw it on and it lasted 2 hours and it was incredible. I mean, sure, it was fun, but there was something different happening in the room.
Mhm.
And just the way my friends worship, full abandon. They do not care what the person beside them.
Mhm.
Some are jumping around, some are moving in the back, some are on their knees. I mean, hands up, just everywhere. At one point, I had my eyes closed, and when I opened them, I just saw like little groups praying over each other. And I just like all of that. It was this moment where I was like, I wish I could invite everyone into this room to
Yeah.
see this, experience this, because I believe that like that is the heart posture that God wants us to have. And like that's that freedom. That's that just ability to know what's important. They knew what was important,
Mhm.
and that is all they cared about.
Mhm.
And that's why, my personal passion for really creating, inclusive churches and just helping the church overall, not just invite people with disabilities in, but like embrace them and
Mhm.
give them roles and have them be just an interconnected part of the church. I think that's so important because there's so much we can learn. And I know you get that. It is kind of fun to hear you talk about Dallas because I knew Dallas and I remember the start of all of this because I remember knowing Dallas from a summer camp and we were good friends. And then a few years later, I remember hearing from one of his friends that he was living with a guy he met from college. And I was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, there's this young life, and he has this friend, they live together now, and I just remember thinking like, wait, like I've never thought of that idea before, like of course, like a need was there, and this guy just stepped in, and so it's fun to have been someone who was, you know, far back spectator for a while, just knowing and seeing little changes. And when I would run into him every once in a while and just seeing the joy he had and how
Mhm.
things seem to be. And
Mhm.
it's neat that, like how many times does God do that where he's like, will you do this one little thing? It's
Mhm.
actually going to turn into this entire life change for
Yeah.
you. Right now, I want you to focus on this one thing. Like, here's
Yeah.
a need, and you are going to step in and fill that need. And then look at how God just continues to work and build. Like, I don't know. Like, tell me, how have you seen God through that? What was that like to go from I'm stepping in because I see a need here to the moment where you went, wow, this could be more, and we should really do something for many people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. Like I love the, some people might call it cliche, but I love that saying of like God, like he's ready to use the willing, And so like, was I equipped to do that? Was I desperate for some purpose and like, where can I contribute some value in the world? Yeah. And was I willing to jump into that situation? Yeah. But I love what you said. Like one little thing, it's like, cause we got started. I told you I'm not that smart. So I didn't have this grand vision. It was just reactive. How do we help Dallas? Right.
Mhm.
And so, and then how do we create a vision for Dallas's life? And then, but I think a big part of that too, Krystian, is being, and this goes back to that word in interdependence, for all of us, is when you're surrounded by amazing people who are all leaning into where the Lord is speaking and the direction he's pointing, and like, man, beautiful things just happen. And so there were people around me helping kind of shape and cultivate that entire vision of that. Maybe this is more, I think for, especially early on, I was pretty like focused. Like I didn't have this grand vision. I think one of the big pieces was when I was a couple months into living with Dallas and just trying to better understand his needs and his challenges so that we could use that as knowledge to really advocate for his future, and how do I best teach skills and where are their deficit areas. And in that assessment process, this psychologist, who quite honestly, she was like, there was nobody else I would have wanted to go to because I just respected her so much. She did her testing with Dallas, and then I kind of shared some of my dreams for Dallas's future, and just, like, I want him to be able to do this and this and that. And she came back and she said, Ben, Dallas's IQ is 52. He's in the bottom 1% intellectually relative to his peers. He's never going to be able to learn and retain all these skills and all these things that you want him to do. And I remember just being so defeated that, but then me and Dallas went back to our apartment, and Dallas is just such a joyful, you can't stay defeated around Dallas,
Sure.
And so he just simply said, Ben, you doing all right? He's so receptive to when somebody's going through something, and he so deeply cares, And so I was like, you know what? Yeah. I am doing all right. Life's going to be all right. We just dug into the word that night. We started, reading in John 5 when he's talking about how Jesus healed the man outside the pool in Bethesda, and who had been laying there paralyzed for 38 years. And it's like a story that I certainly had heard like hundreds of times in my life. But what hit me different that night while we were in our apartment, our kitchen table, was just the simplicity and the profoundness of what Jesus said. Like, he wasn't calling the world's best psychologists or the best leg repair physicians, or he wasn't recruiting the best doctors. He just simply envisioned a brighter future for the man, and he spoke life into it.
Yeah.
Like, pick up your mat and walk. He was playing. I like to think of it as he wasn't playing defense. He was playing offense.
Yeah.
And so it was that moment at the table that just completely shifted my lens of like, man, there's no ceiling to be placed on these friends. Whatever God has for them is what will happen for them. Yeah. And so let's labor towards that vision, and with that posture and with that level of freedom, So it was just, that was a big posture shift for me. Fast forward a year and a half or so of really running hard alongside of Dallas with that mindset. Mm-hmm. And I think that was when it was like, okay, this is a little bit bigger, because, just seeing Dallas, not just learn, but retaining these skills of like, I got to brush my teeth every day, and I got to take a shower every week, and I got to do my laundry every week. I think I said take a shower every week. We should shower every day.
Yeah.
But I've got to wash my bedding on occasion, and I've got to, so I can maintain my hygiene, so I can go get a job, so that, and lose my job because I smell too bad, or just the health aspect of that. Right. But then once I have a job, then I can have income. I can learn financial literacy skills so that I can pay my rent, utilities, go to the grocery store, buy food, come home, learn how to cook and meet my basic needs, rather than becoming dependent on someone else for all of those things. And it's so empowering to these friends to have the autonomy to learn those things and get to do those things, and so the skill itself is cool that they're becoming more independent in that. But to me, it's the confidence that's unlocked, right? You start to see these guys walk a little taller and have, with their shoulders back, speak more confidently, build stronger relationships. So it's so impactful on so many different levels, but I get to see that experience kind of unfold for Dallas and be a part of that. And so it was about a year and a half in when it was like, okay, we've got to figure out how to replicate this. But, to answer part of your question, as I look back on paper, it looks like what we did for Dallas. No one will fully understand just how low I was in that season of life. It changed my life. I mean, I think it probably that experience impacted me more than Dallas, and I can make a strong case for that. And then I've gotten to see that with our other mentors that we hire. Yeah, they're pouring in. Yeah, they're investing. Yes, they're sacrificing. They're doing so much. But the growth that they experience in serving in a really pivotal time in their life, that's really kind of setting the foundation for the rest of their life. Like, I think some of these mentors will go on to be some of the best colleagues, some of the best leaders, the best husbands, the best wives, the best parents, because there's just this level of sacrifice and service, and it's cultivated at such a young age. I certainly was the first benefactor of that experience as a mentor, and it's been really, really fun for me. It's been invigorating for me. It's been uncomfortable for me. And at kind of every different season of our growth leading up to this point over the last, 10 years there's a new kind of seat to step into, if you will, from how do you help Dallas to then how do we help empower people to help more of Dallas's friends, to how do you set up an entire business and structure and process and the right people and set the culture that's going to cultivate and help sustain that level of individual impact at scale. It's often easy to do individual impact or scale, but to do both is really, really special and takes a lot of hands-on effort, and it is so worth every minute of it. And so it's been really fun for me getting to just lead people in that process. And I look at leading people as serving the right people who are equipped to have the impact, or who are called and willing to have the impact. Like, as a leader, your job is to serve them and make sure that they have everything that they need to go do what God's called them to. And so, yeah, that's a really long-winded way of answering your question, to say it's just been an absolute joy for me. And sometimes I have to pinch myself because I look back, man, God could use anybody to do this work, and I get to be a part of it. How cool is that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Goodness, I hate to wrap up because I feel like we could talk for 5 hours. So I want to make sure for our families listening, if they are interested in Shepherd's Way, I know you are doing female housing now as well. So it started out doing males, but you've got female served too, which I was hearing all about you this past weekend at our conference. Some of the girls were talking about Shepherd's Way. And so that was exciting, and they're excited and want to be in your housing as well. So we might see some familiar faces, but how do we best, I'll put your website in our show notes, but what's the best way if a family is going, this really sounds like something we want our child to have as an opportunity, what's kind of the next step to get involved?
Yeah. So really we've tried to make that connection piece as easy for families as possible. They have enough on their plate, right? So there's like a 30 to 60-second form to complete. There's like 5 pieces of information that just gives us name, contact information, and what are you interested in. As soon as we get that back, that lives on our website. It's under an admissions page. Then that gives us the opportunity to follow up and connect with those families and those individuals, and see where the conversation goes, and if we're a good fit for them, and if they're a good fit for us. And so that's kind of the next step in the process for those that want to connect.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for for those of you listening, I will make sure that all of this information is in the show notes. Make sure you check out Shepherd's Way. I'm pretty sure it's shepherds-way.org is their website, or click the link below. But Ben, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, but also just thank you for what you're doing, for stepping in the gap and helping my friend Dallas, and then helping so many other friends past that. And you're a real good leader, and you are, I hear about you all the time, just the way that you love people with disabilities and you love God. And I think those two things together is a good combination. So thank you for just all of you're doing. I hope lots of people go check out Shepherd's Way and support them. I'm sure there's so many other ways that we can come alongside Shepherd's Way and make sure that their programs continue, because so many of our friends need this. They need the programs. And so, of course, Shepherd's Way needs resources and volunteers and mentors. So if it's not something that you can sign someone up to be a program participant, then see some other ways you can get involved. And I would highly encourage that. So with that, that is going to close our podcast episode. Thank you so much for being on here, and we'll talk to you later.
Bless you, Krystian. Thanks for who you are and all you do.
Thanks.